Today I'm going to be talking about the Sony a7 III. I got this camera a year ago and it's what I'm shooting on right now, in case anybody was wondering how the image looks or what kind of videos that it can produce with that camera. Now, I've used this camera for all kinds of purposes. Shoots for my own clothing brand, shoots for other clothing brands as well, and that includes making videos and taking photos. However, this video is mainly going to be about its video capabilities, because obviously that's what I do. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Santo. I'm a videographer / filmmaker, and I shoot content for clothing brands and my own brand as well. Now, I'm not really going to go over specs because there's enough videos out there that go into the specs of the camera. Feel free to check them out. I'm going to focus a bit more on its capabilities in the real world, because obviously specs are great and all, but what really matters is how the camera actually performs in the practical world. And obviously how good this camera is depends on the purpose that you're going to be using it for. So I'm going to be breaking down its usefulness for different scenarios and different purposes. We're going to start with vlogging. A lot of people say that the Sony a7 III isn't really good for vlogging, and that's not because of its shooting capabilities or anything like that. It's literally because of the way that it's built. So this camera doesn't actually have a flip out screen, which means if you were trying to sort of vlog traditionally, where you're sort of like walking and trying to record yourself, you wouldn't be able to see yourself in the camera, and then obviously the framing would be completely off. You wouldn't know whether you're in focus or out of focus, just various different problems that you would encounter. However, where there's a problem, there's a fix. So what you can do in order to kind of counter this issue is basically you can get a mirror and attach it to the top of your camera, and it would show you the reflection of your LCD screen, and obviously that way you'd be able to tell how you look in frame. And obviously this works best if you're using autofocus, because pulling focus manually by looking at that reflection would be pretty hard. But then again, why would you be using manual focus when you're vlogging? You're just making your life hard. Now you might be thinking, what if I want to film myself on a tripod? What if I want to make cinematic videos or cinematic vlogs, put the camera on a tripod and film myself that way? Obviously at that point, the mirror wouldn't be a great option, because you're not really going to be able to see yourself properly, especially in like wider angle shots. It's going to be really hard to tell whether you're correctly in frame and whether you're even in focus, because you might be using manual focus at that point, which would make sense. But like I said, where there's a problem, there's a fix. So there's also a fix for this, which would obviously be to get a camera monitor and attach it on top of your camera. That way you'd get a much bigger screen to work with. And to be fair, even if the LCD screen was a flip out one, you wouldn't really want to be shooting yourself and relying on the LCD screen, because it's pretty small, so it would still be hard to tell if you're properly in focus or not. But obviously with the camera monitor, number one, that gives you a much bigger screen to work with, so you can tell if the framing is right, you can tell if the focus is right as well. And also a lot of the monitors have focus peaking, so you can clearly tell which parts of your image are correctly in focus and which parts are not. But yeah, don't get me wrong, you still can shoot cinematic vlogs by only relying on the tiny LCD screen that you've got, but why would you do that when you can just get a camera monitor? Okay, so for vlogging without any of the extra attachments, I would give this camera probably a 3 out of 10, but bring in all those attachments and that number, I'd say it shoots all the way up to 8 out of 10. Next up is for filmmaking. For making little short films or little cinematic sequences, then the Sony a7 III is a really good camera. One of the reasons why that is because of its low light capabilities. So this camera is very, very good in low light. I've tested it out myself and it's never let me down. And obviously this means that you have a wider range of scenarios that you can use this camera for. So for example, you don't necessarily have to be in really, really bright conditions in order to get good images out of this camera. So I remember the camera I had before this one, I wasn't really able to shoot past a certain time, especially when it was getting dark, because obviously the images would start coming out grainy and it wouldn't look too good. But with the a7 III, I've not had problems like that. And that's pretty good, because you might not always have all the time in the world to do like a whole lighting setup. Sometimes you're just shooting as you go and you don't necessarily have any sort of time or any ability or flexibility to manipulate the lighting that you have. One thing I will say as well is the image quality that comes out of this camera for the price range is quality. And I guess that's probably what you're wondering. Does it have that cinematic look? The answer to that is yes, if you know what you're doing, of course. If you know what you're doing, then you can create some images that look like they literally came straight out of a movie. But like I said, you gotta know what you're doing. If you don't know anything about cameras, you wouldn't be able to just get this camera and start creating some cinematic masterpieces. But then again, I doubt you'd be able to do that with any camera anyways, so yeah, it takes practice. One thing I will say though is that this camera, when shooting in 4K, it can only go up to 30 frames per second. That's the maximum that it can go up to. It can't do 60 frames per second, which means that if you're recording something with the purpose of slowing it down later on, this camera probably isn't the best camera for you. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of slowing down your footage, don't get this camera, because obviously if you try to slow down 30 frames per second, you're just going to get very choppy footage and it doesn't look smooth and it doesn't look nice. Just don't do it. And lastly, this camera can only shoot up to 8-bit. It can't do 10-bit. And a lot of people say, when they're color grading 8-bit footage, it's impossible, it's a nightmare, it's this, it's that, blah, blah, blah. Personally, I don't have that problem. I'm able to color grade footage from this camera the way that I want to color grade it. But yes, if you do push it too much, it does ruin the image. You do start to get those sort of green splotches on the skin. But yeah, if you don't push it too much, then you shouldn't be having any problems. But yeah, overall, we're still going to give it an 8 out of 10 for its filmmaking capabilities. Next up, we have professional video work. Can you take your Sony a7 III and use it for professional paid work? The answer is yes. I mean, personally, nobody has ever asked me what gear I'm using or what camera I'm using for these shoots. No one's ever really cared. What people have cared about the most is probably the end result. People haven't asked me what camera I'm shooting with, but they have asked me for my portfolio or for examples of my previous work. So I guess people care about what you can actually produce rather than what you're using to produce it. But then again, that probably also depends on what niche you're in and what kind of clientele you have. In terms of practicality, this camera has really good battery life. I've been to a lot of shoots where I've literally not taken any spare batteries with me, and the camera has lasted me the whole shoot with a lot of battery life to spare as well. And for me, this is important because the camera that I had before that, there would be so many times that the camera would just die on me mid-shoot, and then I'd have to take a break to either charge the camera or would have to be using spare batteries. But yeah, for this camera, I haven't really had to use any spare batteries. And yeah, it's just nice not to have to worry about your camera dying on you. But yeah, this camera is definitely capable of producing professional work. I'd say probably the only downside of this camera is the lack of 10-bit, which is probably the only thing that will sort of hold you back if you have this camera. But other than that, it's a pretty good camera for professional work. So I'd give it an 8 out of 10 still. But yeah, this camera's not perfect. It has its flaws like any other camera. But if you're thinking about getting your first camera, or maybe you want to upgrade from the camera that you already have, then I would say yeah, the Sony a7 III is a solid choice for that. But yeah, thank you very much for watching up until this point. You already know what to do. Drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.